Hey there, folks. Welcome to Head, Heart, and Hustle, the podcast for creatives. As always, I'm Alan Plummer, your host. Thank you for listening. Anyone with a side hustle or creative outlet can feel isolated from friends, family, and others around them who just don't get their passion. That's why Head, Heart, and Hustle exists, to help you feel motivated, learn, and just get a nice pick-me-up of creative energy from other people like yourself. Every episode, I interview a creative individual who doesn't just pretend to be creative. They've rolled up their sleeves and are producing great things because they need to. They know that being creative is part of who they are. Sound familiar? Awesome, you're in the right place. Now today, we have my friend Jon Goldberg. Jon is a creative director for ad agencies in Manhattan. He's also a writer. He recently finished his first book of personal essays and short stories based on his own life, and he is now working on a novel. So Jon and I will talk about writing, being a professional creative in the ad agency, and a whole host of other things. So with that, let's dive in. Jon, how are you?
I'm really good.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great.
Been a while.
It has been a really long time.
I know. We were talking about it as you came in the door. Longer than I would have liked. I suddenly feel much older than I did. I looked at a picture a couple days ago from before we had our son. It was like 7 years, and I was like, holy crap, what happened to me?
Yeah, no.
I look so great.
It's scary. It's scary how that happens. And it's also like when you start talking about, when's the last time I saw you? Was it 3 or 5 years? Like
right.
When you start losing like years of like that's when it
that's just
like,
a bad sign.
Yeah.
Well, you look great. You look
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
So before we dive in, I just want to give paint a picture for folks real quick. We are in a lovely meeting room at Spring Studios in Lower Manhattan. I guess officially we're in Tribeca.
It's beautiful. I'm impressed.
I am too. We were commenting on how big this place is. It's a decent view from Manhattan. And we're not looking at subway tracks or anything, so it's nice enough. But yeah, thanks for doing this. So, you and I go back for a couple of years professionally, not really what I always talk to people about, but we've known each other for a while. I realized not too long ago, you've been on my list of folks that I wanted to talk to for a while for this podcast because of your professional career, which we'll get into. But when I realized you had kind of jumped back into writing, that definitely bumped you up to say, I'm coming up to New York. We got to get together and chat.
Yeah.
So let me start there and just ask you, like I always do with folks, to just introduce yourself, tell folks who you are and a little bit about yourself.
My name's Jon Goldberg. I guess professionally, I'm a creative director in advertising. I've been a writer, screenwriter, a TV. Pretty much, if it's been written, except for maybe a cookbook, I've tried it. And I just recently finished a book of personal essays.
Congrats. Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. One of the things that I think we always talk about is kind of folks' childhood and how they became creative. I did not grow up in a creative household, but I kind of gravitated towards writing at a fairly young age. What about yourself? Did you kind of start out as a creative kid?
Yes. I mean, I grew up, I was born actually in Birmingham, Alabama in the late 60s, so obviously a lot going on, and my mom was very active in the civil rights movement, so there was always stuff going on that just, not necessarily in the creative world, but just I was tapped into what was going on at a very early age. And then, my parents... And I realize that now as a parent, like when I take my kids to see movies and things like that, they took me to everything because they wanted to see the movies. Right. And they just dragged me with them. And I saw crazy movies, when that I shouldn't be seeing at 6. Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, whatever was there.
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles, yep. Fart joke. Funniest thing I had ever seen.
That's
so
awesome.
I was tapped into that. And then just writing, it's funny you bring that up because now I found a book a couple of years ago of my writing when I was like the age of my kids, I was 8 or 9.
Right.
And I had all these stories and my kids, they've read them to their class, my stories. Yeah. And, they're kids' stories. They're obviously written by a kid, but the imagination, I could tell I was into it because I would create this, I would create all these characters. Like one character was a mouse that lived in Madison Square Garden. I moved to New York when I was 8 or 9 and I just became a huge sports fan. Okay. So that was one of my characters. But the thing I realized that makes my kids laugh is I didn't know how to end a story, so every ending of the story, the character died. Because that was just the easiest way. And we all know how hard it is to end a story.
Right. So you're like, well, there's no follow-up to that.
Nope. And it was always like, and we never heard from them again because they died.
Because they're dead.
Right, yeah.
It's a little morbid, but maybe,
Yeah, for a 9-year-old. Right? But it was more about I probably just didn't know how to end it.
Right. Well, if you want to get existential, eventually all of our stories end in death.
That's the greatest ending of all.
Let's just say that you're deep. Let's just say that you're a deep child.
I will not take that credit.
That's awesome. What do your kids think? So your kids have read that stuff? Did you let them read it?
Yeah, they love it. They ask me to tell the stories and to read them to them, and they love like the specifics of them. And awesome. Again, they've brought them into their classroom.
It's funny. My son, and I want to talk about your kids too, and whether or not your kids are creative. My son definitely is. As I mentioned, he's 6. He's showing some of that creative aptitude early on. He's definitely a visual artist. He's drawing all the time, but he's also a world builder. Like he'll draw pictures and he'll create his own characters, and he comes up with these backstories and characters and settings. And at 6, I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, and I want to like dump gasoline on the fire. Like, go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see some of that in your kids? Do you think it's the same?
Yeah. I mean, my son is so focused on like science and like the animal world. Like he's encyclopedic in terms of his knowledge.
Right.
My daughter is more in the arts, like music and writing and things like that. She hasn't like focused in on one thing. She's sort of dabbling in everything.
Got it. And how old are they?
My son's 13. My daughter's 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Because I didn't really think of myself, I don't know about you, but I didn't really recognize kind of that artistic slant until I kind of almost hit puberty. Like I felt like it was just part of something you did. Yeah. And it wasn't until kind of those teenage years that I started to see the differences in personalities and say, oh, that's part of who I am, and that's a little different than everybody.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just kind of took it for granted, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I floated around. Like I was that guy that was the part of every kind of group. I was like in the artsy group. I was an athlete. Yeah. I was with like the stoner group. I could move around and be accepted in each one, and I kind of liked that.
And I was kind of the same way, kind of a social butterfly.
Yeah.
Which worked out really well. Also not surprising that probably played a role in your career path as well.
Sure.
Because that certainly comes in handy.
Sure.
As a creative individual who can kind of flip and kind of turn certain character traits off and on.
Yes,
there's
and
a need for that.
See who's in the room.
Yeah,
exactly. Play the room.
And adjust accordingly.
Yes, exactly.
You don't learn it overnight, but it does happen.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about like your growth as a creative, because you did talk about being a creative director and your kind of professional career. I interview people some of whom are professional creatives and the creativity led into a career. Some are people that have personal projects that are kind of their creative passions. You do a little bit of both. Talk to me a little bit about kind of that move into working in an ad agency and being a creative director, and how did that impact your creativity in your personal life? And now it feels like you're rediscovering writing, and what does that evolution look like?
I mean, advertising happened to me by accident. I was in LA trying to be a screenwriter, I was miserable. I was just like cranking out work, but nothing hitting. Almost. Right. I got one thing, like, they get you for a little bit, and then it's constant rejection. And I had friends that worked in Portland in advertising at Wieden & Kennedy. And, I didn't know anything about advertising. I didn't know that Wieden & Kennedy was the best place to work. Right. And got entree into that world and realized, like, hey, you're going to pay me to do this. Right. And I'm making stuff right away. Like, immediately I started to make stuff. I did, like, an NFL spot and just traveled around the country. And I was like, this is pretty amazing. I always had the bug to keep writing, so I never took full-time employment, and I kept sort of moving around a little bit. And then eventually I moved back to New York and took my first full-time job at the Wieden & Kennedy New York office.
Got it.
And then it just grew and grew in terms of in advertising, as long as you stick it out and you make good enough work, they promote you. And this is kind of the issue with advertising, and I'm sure other industries as well. Right. They promote you out of what you're good at.
Yep.
And into something you haven't proven at all that you can do it. And that's what happens when you become like an associate creative director or creative director. You start having to manage people.
Right.
And you have to learn that skill.
And they don't teach you that. They just kind of throw you in.
They don't teach you, and you find out how to survive and whether you're good at it or not, because you're managing people, and you're talking to clients more, and you're trying to manage that, fight for work, know when to push the buttons. All these different things come in handy.
Right.
And the work is always the key. You want to keep the integrity of the work, but you also need to respect everyone in the room and their opinions.
Yeah. It is a bit of a difference going from, and for me too, going from being a creative and being a journalist to kind of leading internal creative teams. It's funny hearing you kind of start. I mean, when I moved to New York, it was '97, and my version of that in financial services was being sent to Morgan Stanley there at 48th and Broadway as a temp, and working for a managing director, and just not knowing how big of a deal that was.
Yeah.
And like, okay, fine, and having somebody who's like, all right, you just kind of, right, you just start to get in and start to learn some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And at least for me, there wasn't so much of that fear, because you just kind of get thrown into the deep end and you learn it. But then as my career evolved, somewhat parallel to yours, I think, there is that kind of difference of, now I'm going from a doer to a leader. Yeah. And that's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different set of skills.
Completely different. And you still want to be creative,
right,
but you have to back off a little, because you're dealing with people who want to start their careers and make stuff. So, I learned a lot of what not to do as a CD than what to do from
right,
people, because some people can't, they have to do it themselves. And that's like the worst thing to do as a leader, to look at someone and say, no, do this, no, do that.
Right.
The key is, if you really feel like there's something there that you want done, you have to make that person feel like they did it.
Yeah.
And it still makes you feel like, okay, this is what I wanted out of it. And that's the skill.
Yeah. Do you think that your experience as a creative director has made you a better writer? Or are there moments and lessons that you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's carried over?
I mean, definitely. I don't know how, but I feel like writing and advertising is a completely different skill set.
Right.
I'll probably go off on a tangent here, but whenever my teams are frustrated with like, client won't buy this is the best work, blah, 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 they start to bitch and moan.
Yeah.
I let it bubble up, but if it gets to a point where it just pisses me off, I've done this 2 or 3 times. I've given this sort of rant speech where I get them in the room. There's like 20 of them in the room,
right,
and I give my like art and commerce speech, and I say, look, I know you guys are artists and writers,
right,
and you think this is art.
Right.
It's not, because and I said, go write your own stuff, go paint, go do whatever you think is your pure art, because the moment you share your idea with a partner, it starts to get watered down.
Right.
Then the moment you start to share it to the account person, there's going to be comments.
Yep.
The strategist, comments. Schmucks like me, I might kill stuff right away.
Right.
And then it goes to a client. So
and the client craps all over it.
Right. So where is your original idea, that art that you you're going to get frustrated, but don't think this is art. Yeah. Like, you're going to have to move around, you're going to have to think on your feet, and things are going to change. And I know that's a shitty thing to say to some of them.
I don't think it is. I think it's healthy, because I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I think it's good, because I think there is that acknowledgement, and there's a fine line, right? So to your point, you want people to produce good work, and they need to give a damn about what they're creating, or they're just going to kind of check the box and throw it away. But at the same time, like, our shorthand for that is, is your name on it at the end of the day.
Right.
Right? When you're publishing for a brand, or you're doing advertising or anything, it's like, is your name on that when it's said and done, whether it's a film or a song or a script or whatever? And if the answer is no, then you kind of have to say, this is the world of being a working creative.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the difference as opposed to a non-working artist.
Yeah.
Where you can just, when I'm writing, I just love the writing. Once it starts to get to be business time and I have to call someone and try and push it, it starts to get obviously less fun, and it starts to get frustrating. I mean, I love when I don't care if people comment and criticize. That's not what frustrates me. What frustrates me is what I'm dealing with now, which is I've chosen the most difficult genre for an unknown writer to get into. And my response was but this is what I wanted to write.
Right.
And so, and it's funny, what I've heard from a lot of agents is, really, I see the voice, I hear the voice, good stuff. You've chosen a very difficult genre. I don't think I can sell an unknown, but I'd love to see what you could do with a novel.
I think that's awesome.
It's awesome, but I'm okay, I'll see you in 4 years.
Right.
Which is
my
frustrating.
Version of that, when I moved to New York, I was writing when I got out of college and before I moved up here, and I had done my first novel and a couple plays, and I was submitting, a summary of the novel and basically a chapter or two to some agents. And I had a couple agents here, some prominent agents, kind of give me similar feedback. One came back to me, I was 27 at the time, and said, "You're a talented writer, you're great. Come back to us in 15 years, go live your life." And I was fuck.
Right.
I was that's great, that's encouraging. And I was so how do I live?
Yeah.
How am I going to put food in my mouth for 15 years?
Exactly.
That's awesome. I think that's healthy though, and it's one of the things that I always kind of get into in these podcasts is this balance between working with your creative skills and not totally investing yourself in that as your sense of identity, and then still having something left over to do on the outside.
Yeah,
I know for me, for a long time, when I was doing the journalism and writing for a living, it was really hard for me to write creatively when I came home because I was just tapped out.
Yeah.
That was a real struggle for me for a long time. It took a while for me to kind of get back into that.
Yeah, no, it's advertising does that as well because a little bit less so now, but you're writing in 30 seconds. You're writing in these clipped little lines, and then to sort of go into longer form, it's different muscle. You have to I have time.
Yeah.
I have time to do this, and once you can tap into that, it's great. The freedom of it, of not having the limitations that advertising puts on you, it's fantastic.
And not having to do something creatively for money. For me, right? Once you get to a point to where you're kind of stable in your career and you have money and you're doing this kind of stuff and you're doing it for yourself, I totally get the agent thing. But there's a lot less pressure on me in terms of how I define success and what that looks like than there was in my 20s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I also think, and I don't know about you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. My definition of success has changed. As I've gotten older and had kids and had a family versus kind of that very linear mass media name recognition that gets pumped into you when you're a teenager and stuff by television and everything else.
It's funny. I have a story about on the subject of success. So one day I had my kids with me. They had to come to my office, and it was the worst timing. It was during a pitch or something. So I thought I was just going to have to deal with them for a half an hour, but it went on and on for a couple of hours, and they were just tugging at me when can we go, and I got to do this work. And finally I took them out to dinner right near the office. Then it was 9 o'clock at night, and I took them on the train home, and the train was crowded, and they were bitching about that. So they were just bitching the whole time.
Right.
Finally, as we're getting off the train and walking home, and it's really late, they were just complaining, and I stopped them and I said, "Look, you just got a sense of what my day is like pretty much every day.
Right.
And this is what it takes to be successful." And my son looks at me and he starts blinking. He does his sort of blinking, thinking thing. He goes, "So are you saying you're a success or not a success?" And I just like, let's just go home.
Let's just go.
I just couldn't. I couldn't really answer that one.
Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I did not want to ask that.
Did he go home and ask your wife?
No.
That's what my son would have done. He would have gone home and said,
"Daddy's successful.
Mommy, is Daddy successful or not?"
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, my definition of success is sort of it's a combination of responsibility and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can I be responsible and take care of what I need to take care of, and also enjoy what I do?
Yep.
Doesn't happen every day, but there are some days where I'm like, okay, I got this. This is kind of working. This balance is working.
Right.
And I think if I can continue to write my own stuff, find that time, and and advertising, as far as jobs go, we complain all the time, but it's a pretty awesome job to be able to still be creative and make money and support your family, whatever. So it's tough when we complain about advertising because there's a lot worse jobs in the world.
My brother and I, my brother's a technical writer, and we kind of have shorthand for that stuff. We joke about that being first world problems.
Oh yeah.
We're like, we all have a right to gripe and bitch sometimes, but it's like in the grand scheme of things in this world, it's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one young writer a couple of years ago when working with me came up to me and he was bitching about something. He goes, "Really? I have to redo that whole thing?" And I just said, "That's why they call it a job."
Yeah, yeah.
And there's definitely there's a little bit of a privileged group coming in right now.
Okay.
In advertising that just like I would never. I don't want to do the get off my lawn thing. No. But like I would never have thought to like question the assignments that I got on.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'd grumble a little bit, but I'd do it. I wouldn't go to the person that's assigning it to me and say like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
And somehow they're getting away with it.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Because one of the experiences I've had, I've got a millennial who reports to me, and what's interesting for me is I see some of the opposite of that. And what's fascinating for me at our company is you've got so many millennials who, but they're chomping at the bit because maybe it's an element of that because there is this kind of, hey, I'm capable of doing more.
It is that
I need to kind of ramp up.
Yeah,
I mean?
The work ethic is there.
Yeah. There's
just a little dose of privilege that's coming to like it's they want to get there.
Right.
There's like this feeling of I want to get there faster.
Do you think some of that is kind of the environment? So part of it, again, let me flip it a little bit. So I'm a little bit younger than you. I was born in 71.
Yep.
I think about when I finished college in the mid-90s, right? The economy was shit. Everybody was taking temp jobs. They were talking about reinstating the draft, right? We've got the first Iraq war, Iran, all that kind of stuff. We all kind of, as Gen Xers, it was kind of like, we're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to look after ourselves. And, we don't really expect much out of corporate America. You got to carve your own way out. You got to look after yourself. Now I look at kind of where we're at. It all comes back to me. It all comes back to this mass media and technology. And now we hear stories about like these, millionaires that, have YouTube followings and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's that kind of, not emphasis, but you kind of I could see hearing those stories as a college student or a teenager and thinking, well, I can do that. I've got a video camera. I've got a phone.
Yeah.
I've got a YouTube account.
Yeah.
Whether that's right or not, because it used to be, right? To your point, like you were writing scripts, you had to sell them to studios.
Yeah.
You had to sell them to a network to get them on TV. Now, all that's democratized. Now it's like, F it, I can do it myself.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side is, in terms of what I was saying about the millennials is they are so capable of so many things. Like their full-time job could be a side job.
Yeah.
Or this is my day job, but I have this whole other thing that I'm doing on the side. Like the ability to it's not even multitasking. It's beyond that. Like to be able to focus so much and put so much time and effort into so many things. Like I give all the credit in the world to that because that's not easy. And that's just where we are right now.
And it feels like a lot of millennials do that.
Yeah.
A lot of them have these side hustles in addition to what they're doing on their own.
Constant.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I totally get that. Sometimes I like being around them. One, because I'm still 25 in my head.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then at the same time, there is something about that kind of self-driven motivation that I really like.
Yeah.
That I can kind of identify with.
Yeah, it's definitely not laziness. It's more like they're just eager. They just want to get to a place.
Yeah, and let's be honest, as a culture, we undersell the hard work that goes into success, right?
Yeah.
We've always, in the United States, kind of downplayed that. Everybody's an overnight success.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so I remember learning that lesson and kind of coming up and saying, God, it really does take time. And, how many hours, there's the first draft and all the hours editing and rewriting. And, like, that's, to your point, that's the work. That's the stuff that's not glamorous.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm completely with you. You talked a little bit about that work-life balance, right? Mm-hmm. So having the kids, having the job, and writing. How do you juggle that, or what does that look like for you? How do you kind of manage that?
Very, very messy.
Okay.
Like it's definitely not easy.
Yeah,
it's inconsistent.
Yep.
It's just, you find a way though. Obviously, my wife understands it. She was in the business, mm-hmm. and so she gets it, and she's been supportive of it.
Yeah.
So that you definitely need that.
Yep.
But it's not, I wish I could be more like scheduled and more like, this is the time. Yeah. I'm not that type. And I know there are plenty of writers, and, when I listen to writers or read about their process, I'm very jealous of the discipline.
Totally.
Because I go in waves. I'll just like disappear for 4 hours and get a lot done.
Yeah.
Or I'm just like sitting there and I got nothing.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I go through, it's almost like, I'll use the word manic for me. I'll go through this phase where I had this idea for this podcast, and I ended up doing all these interviews. Some of them I couldn't use. I had lined up like 9 interviews, started playing around with editing, started building the website, getting the logo, doing all that. And it was all in like a 10, 12-week period. And I started looking at the hours. I was counting this the other day, how many hours I put in. I was like, holy crap. Like my wife probably never saw me. Or I would come home from work, I'd eat dinner, put my son to bed, and he'd go to sleep at like 8. And then I'd come down and put in like 3 hours. And my wife would come down at 11:30 and be like, you got to get up. Like, you got to get up early. You got an 8 o'clock meeting. Get to bed. And I would get manic about that. But then I'd get to a certain point, and I'd be like, okay, I'm kind of at this pause. It's not even a stop. And then I'd pause, and I'd be like, damn, I need a day or a weekend, right, just to kind of chill and not do that and recharge a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I find myself kind of struggling to get back into it.
How did I? Yeah, it's because those moments where you lose time, that's, I'm guessing, where you do your best work.
Yes, and that's the part I love.
And you want to get back to that.
Yes.
You want to get into, it's sort of like, it's like a meditation where you're like, how do I get on that roll?
Totally.
And you're like, wow, that was 3 hours. I did that. I feel.
And it takes me, I don't know about you, but it takes me about 15, maybe 20 minutes to get into that zone, and then I'm good.
Yeah.
And I do have natural pauses.
One of the processes in terms of writing that I used to do is if I was on a roll, I would stop when I had something left so that I could get started the next time, because the tendency is to like get it all out, but I knew like I'm trying to help John the next day. Like when you're ready to go, you have something to start to get on a roll. So it's those kinds of things that sort of help me, those little tricks on myself.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit different, that I have a lot more going on where I have notes. I'm just tapping in notes in my phone, or I'll carry a notebook and just come up with an idea. And then the key is to be able to write it quick enough, but detailed enough that when I look at it, whenever the next time I see it, I was like, I understand what I was thinking in that moment. Because sometimes you're just like, you're on the subway and you get an idea and you write it down and it's so clear, and then later on you're looking at it and like, what the hell does that mean? What does man kissing woman on train while holding on, like, what does that mean? like it was so clear. It was such a great idea. You're like arguing with yourself, like, you idiot. That means nothing. That's a terrible idea.
I know. And I do that, and then you kind of overdo it.
Yeah.
My old habit, right, very analog, but pre-internet, again, back in the 90s, I used to carry one around, the Sony micro cassette recorders. And I kept it in my car in my jacket. And I was such a nerd. I would just record and talk into it.
Yeah, you do the Michael Keaton.
Do the Michael Keaton thing. I would talk
Call
into
Starkist.
it. Yeah, exactly. And then hang on to it.
Just mix the tuna in, the mayo in the tuna.
Yes.
Call Starkist.
Exactly. And then once a week I would transcribe it. And that seemed to work pretty well. It didn't necessarily look very cool when I was out in public, but it certainly worked.
Yeah. Whatever tricks you can do, I'm all for, because you do have those moments where you're inspired by something, and if I've done the thing where I'm like, oh, I'll remember it, and then you don't remember it quite clearly, and you lose that thought.
Yeah. It's the balance thing is hard, and catching those kind of moments is hard, and I also feel like those kind of creative sparks, they kind of build, they kind of snowball. Like, I feel like when I've taken a break for a while, it's like jump-starting an engine. It takes a while to get some good ones or to get a couple. And then it's kind of like once the engine's primed, man, they just kind of fire off pretty quickly on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how this book happened. I mean, the book was like a 4-year process, but it was more like I had these crazy stories that had happened in my life. Nothing out of, like, I guess I go off the mundane that I find funny.
Right.
And now some of the stuff that happened to me, it's not so mundane. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I did one that I thought was really funny, and I'm like, okay, there's more stuff. And then
is that the cat one? The cat one.
The cat one is the one that just got published. And so, I mean, the cat one, basically this girlfriend of mine had an old cat that I had to take care of, and eventually it died, and she asked me to stay with her while the dead cat was on the bed. So the story is more about me having to take care of this really sick cat.
Right.
But the end, the thing that people remember most is that there was this dead cat on the bed.
Yeah.
I mean, it was scary. It was like, I couldn't believe and so I'm still in touch with her, and I've had to, like, I told her, I'm like, I wrote this story, and I'll change your name if you want.
Right.
She was pretty cool with it, although she was like, did that really happen? I'm like,
yes.
You're not going to get...
So you went through all that PTSD, and she doesn't even remember it?
It trickled back to her.
We're not saying names.
It trickled back to her. And then she was questioning, like, timing. I'm like, no, I was only living in Seattle for this amount of time, so it had to have been. So,
that's funny.
But she was fine with it. She didn't make me change the name.
It is a bit surreal. It is a bit surreal.
Yeah, so all of the stories are a little bit like that, and they would just come to me like, oh yeah, this happened, that happened, and and so finally I had this, the idea, like, this feels like a book, and ultimately the worst thing I have now is sort of a record for my kids to sort of a weird history of my life.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. I've toyed around with that in the back of my head, and there's some stuff like that I'm like, I need to put that down, and I need to kind of document some of that. How would you describe your voice?
It's pretty sarcastic, and the way I write, I'm influenced by a lot of different writers. I'm a big David Sedaris fan. William Goldman is my favorite writer. Woody Allen. Larry David. Yeah. So
Sedaris has been a favorite of mine too for a number of years.
Yeah.
I really like his style.
Yeah, and it's I'm not comparing, but I'm saying,
but they're influenced.
I'm saying I'm influenced, and that's what I'm going for, is to just, I sort of tell it exactly like it happened. The way, so someone who worked with me, and and I hadn't worked with her in a couple of years, she read my stuff, and she goes, oh my God, this is like I'm having a conversation with you.
Yeah. Which is like the greatest compliment you can
do. Yeah, no, it was great.
It really is.
And I was like, and the best thing is, you don't have to actually be with me. You don't have to spend time with me. You can just go in and out.
I think as a writer, to have somebody say to you that your writing is as natural as your speaking voice is like the ultimate compliment.
Yeah.
From somebody
Yeah,
who
and
knows.
I mean,
I really think it is. And I laugh because as long as I've known you, it matches your voice. It matches kind of how you talk. You've always told things with this very straight kind of dry approach, but there's always been this undercurrent of like, can you believe this shit really happened?
Right.
Like, you know, you're not that direct,
Right.
but there's always kind of like, wait till you get a load of this.
Yeah.
X and Y and Z. So it makes total sense.
Yeah.
It makes complete
No,
sense.
so the voice is purely me, and it does, you know, it is a lot like my spoken voice, and I've tried to stay true to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so you're looking for agents now. You're going through a lot of that process, which is brutal. So kudos to you for kind of getting back on that. Did you think, because I've almost gone in the other direction with stuff. I've self-published stuff under a pseudonym, and I've written a bunch of stuff, but I've always been really interested in kind of doing things on my own terms and relying less on publishers and mass media. Not that I'm against them. I don't necessarily at this point in my life want to put myself through that kind of process of frustration again.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm leading a little bit. Did you ever kind of think one approach versus the other, or was there a certain rationale for going this direction?
Well, I thought about it. I know nothing about that business.
Okay.
And so I'm learning as I go. I'm talking to some people. The self-publishing always felt like, why not just do that? But
right.
I don't know. And it's possible. I mean, the one thing I did was I just decided in February that I was going to just put it up on a blog, and once a week I posted a story.
Right.
And I got I got my friends or whatever on Facebook.
Right.
I would just say it's the next one's up, and people were starting to look forward to it. They're like, this is like my
awesome.
Monday thing, like for my train ride or something like that. So ultimately, I just wanted people to read it.
Yep.
Like that makes me feel good that someone's reading it.
Yeah.
And so I did that. So that's not necessarily self-publishing, but at least it's getting it out there.
Is. Yeah.
And who knows? Someone's hopefully someone reads it, and this now that the cat story's been published, and I don't know if this journal, it's brand new, so I don't know who's reading it, but apparently the writers on there are legit, and that's where agents and publishers go to find new voices.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good.
We'll see.
That's awesome. I've found I really struggled with frustration in that when I first started, and like you, I was also much younger and didn't know anything about it, and nobody kind of coaches you through that process, and it's daunting, and you don't know what it's going to look like. I also think there's a bit of a double-edged sword with kind of publishing stuff yourself, right? Because today with social media and everything, right, all this stuff is created to kind of appeal to our lizard brains and that immediate feedback loop.
Right.
And so that's a vicious cycle, because you can publish something and go back and see how many people read it today. How many people commented on it, right? It's not even been 24 hours. How many more people downloaded this podcast? I will fully admit that I've done that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not proud of it.
No.
But that's the downside.
But you have to, yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. No, I completely get that. Absolutely. How do you talked a little bit about creative success and how you kind of define that. What advice do you have for people when it comes to pursuing their creative endeavors? What would you give them?
I mean, it really doesn't matter whether it's advertising or writing or anything. Like, don't try to please someone else. Like, you have to find it, whether it's funny, exciting, and whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, it has to appeal to you, because if it doesn't, and you're writing for someone else that you think someone else is going to like it, it's never going to work, because you haven't passed the first test, which is like, is this really what you like? Is this really something you want to do? Right. And we forget that because you're talking to other people, you're getting, whether it's in advertising, you're getting a brief, and so it's influenced by that. But you have to put what you think is best for you out there. You're the audience.
Right.
I hired you because I think you're talented. I think you're funny. Like, you're good. You're good. Do what you do.
Right.
And I've had actually had, a back and forth with people where I've said, I want to get you to be the kind of writer where I don't know who wrote this, and I see it, and I say, like, okay, Alan wrote that.
Right.
Because I know Alan has a voice. And some people push back and like, well, shouldn't the voice be in the brand?
Right.
I'm like, you can find different voices in a brand.
Yeah.
But if you're truly like that's the purest form of writing. If I can see that that's your work up there, and you have this voice that's consistent, and you're saying something that's coming from you, then I feel like you've done your job, and that's the purest form of creativity, is if it's coming straight from you and I can recognize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. No.
Last question I always ask everybody, right? How do people find you online? The journal and the blog and stuff. Now you get to plug yourself.
Oh, awesome. Well, so my blog is Goldberg Jon, and it's Jon, Goldbergjon, blog,
Okay.
BLOG,
Yep.
.tumblr.com.
Okay.
That's a tough one.
Okay.
And
I'll find it embedded in the links, so when I do the recap, I'll put it in there.
So all the stories are there. The cat story is there. The cat story is actually in this journal. It's called The Chaos, and that's the chaos.life.
Okay.
So that's in there, and I am working on a novel, because they all said, like, let's see what you can do with the novel.
Like, okay.
So maybe I'll talk to you in 5 years with my novel.
Awesome. We can talk before then. Let's not wait another 5 years.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Thank you,
All right,
Alan.
man. Thank you. I appreciated it.
Thank you.
All right. All right, Jon. Thanks for doing that. Folks, if you heard noises in the background, car horns and things, no, it was not you. That was actually the city traffic of New York you heard in the background. Yeah, thank you so much, Jon. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, folks, you did as well. Now, if you like the episode, shoot me an email and let me know. In fact, to show my appreciation, I'll send you a few stickers and buttons as my way of saying thanks. Just remember to include your mailing address in your email to me. You can reach me at headheartandhustle@gmail.com or through our website. You can also get email updates from us, which are fairly inconsistent depending on how busy my life gets. Visit headheartandhustle.com/newsletter to sign up for those. Also, remember that you can find us on the web at headheartandhustle.com, and of course, we're all over social media. Our logo was created by Meg Shear. If you like it, check out her other work on Society 6. The music you hear each episode was written and performed by my friends in the band Starch to Sugar. You can check them out at starchtossugar.com and on Facebook. Lastly, if you're interested in being interviewed for a future episode, contact me at headheartandhustle@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening. Now go create something.